Mike from Shuswap Ski and Board giving you a how-to on repairing wake surfers. Wake surfers are especially vulnerable to getting dinged because you're so close to the back of the boat. It's easy to slip off, send it into the back of the boat, and get a nice ding in it. On this board, someone's put a good shot right here. As you can see, it got dropped on its edge and it's cut into the core. So we need to get that core sealed up so that the water can't get into the board. All right, to do our repair this afternoon and get this board sealed up, we need an assortment of tools. It's always best to have everything laid out beforehand so you don't have to go looking for things when the epoxy's hardening on you. So first up, epoxy, most important thing. We've got the LePage's Speed Set. We buy it in the big bottles like this. This one here is the one you'll find in most hardware stores. So then you need something to mix up the epoxy, or a precision screwdriver, something to mix it on, ideally something that won't absorb the epoxy. Also a good idea to keep some paper towels handy because you're going to have epoxy all over the place. You want to mop it up. You'll see how we use tape as one of the other little tricks of the trade. And of course you need something to spread the epoxy. I save my hotel room keys, but I also have Shuswap Ski and Board gift cards that do that same job really well. Okay, I start when I can. It's not always that easy to find a color match, and so some people won't want to even bother, but I think this one's going to be close to the color of the board on the edge, so I'm going to color it in before I lay the epoxy down. So there's two parts to the epoxy, as we said before. You're going to have a resin and a hardener. There's ways of mixing them differently. We just go real simple, 50-50, so even parts of both of them. So let's take a little squirt of one. And how do you know? Well, I've been doing it for a long time. You could probably do way more precise versions of this, but just sort of do a bit of that. And the one is thinner than the other, so it always looks like there's more of it when in reality this one's actually thicker. So that's pretty close to an even mix. Very important that you mix it up real well. So spend an extra second or two doing that. And then I try to sort of get a little pile of it built up somewhere there. And then we head over to the board. I take this with me to the board so that I don't slop it all over the place as I'm working. Okay, so using the awl, I'll take just a little bit of that. I kind of do it like I'm wrapping spaghetti around a fork, right? So we get a little bit on there like that, and then I start to put it in to the areas where we need to get epoxied. As you're applying it, you're probably best to go on the lighter side because, of course, it will run if you go too much. Something like this one here, really there's sort of two ways we could do this. We could do just get it sealed up and get back on the water, or we can do a bit more detailed version with a few coats involved and try and actually repair the shape of the board in that area. So I think we're going to do a bit of both. We'll start with this first one as just enough to get it sealed up, and then we're going to go to coming back to it and adding some additional layers to fill it in and get the board closer to its original shape. So I think we've got enough epoxy for this first coat in there. So I'm going to set that down. I'm going to give my awl a wipe because I want to make sure it stays clean and ready for the next go. I'm going to pick up my beautiful gift card. And then I just ever so gently will slide along here. You see, obviously I got a dip there while I do that, but we want to make sure the epoxy's not slipping out and going all over the rest of the board. So it looks like that's going to be pretty good. And just to make sure we're okay on that, that always happens, I'm just going to tilt the board a bit more up and down at 90-degree angle so the epoxy can't come rolling out of the front or the back of the board. I think that's about it for the moment. Coat number 2 in a little while. All right, while the epoxy is hardening on our Oogle board, we're going to pull out another one, a different type of repair. This is a Hyperlite. We got to be fair with the brands that get dinged up here. And it's got a bit of a ding here where someone went boom. We want to make sure it's level when we do the repair, so let's find our Hewish Outdoors, distributors of Bear wetsuits worldwide, and set that there. And that looks like that's going to be pretty level. So that's how we're going to start up. Back to our marking. Again, this one doesn't need much, but just a little to take the white away just a little wee bit there. Back to our epoxies and our blatant prug for Shuswap ski and board and our sign cards. I need to leave these sitting pointed down. And you see, I'm not using much because we don't have anywhere near as big a hole to deal with as we did on the last one. Once again, some good mixing. And then we keep our card right next to where we need to get the epoxy because we'd like to not dribble it all over the board. My same spaghetti wrapping trick. Get that right in there. And we want just enough to go over the top of the dent. So then, again, with the card this way, so you got as long a flat surface as possible, we're going to scrape that to fill it in. Going the one way. Then the same thing going the other way. It looks pretty darn close to flat, and if we want to be a little fussy, we can just clean up that last little bit of excess epoxy. And there you have it, looking good. All right, back to round two with our pal, the Oogle board from phase 5 here, with that had that nasty ding in it here. So we're gonna fill that in more, and it's the trouble with epoxy, of course, is that until it sets, it's gonna run. So here's a little trick that we do. I'm sure there's a million ways of doing this, but we're gonna make a little sidewall out of the tape. So I want to line this up with the edge of the board as precisely as I can. Put a couple of coats of tape. All right, so that's step one. So now we're going to mix up the epoxy again. And we're going to get the epoxy in there so that it fills up that area. And by having that little pretend wall we made, we can probably get away with maybe a total of 3 or 4 coats to fill it in instead of 5 or 6 by thinly layering it each time. So basically the same process we went through before, only we're going to be a bit more generous with the epoxy this time because we need a bit more of it. Same 50-50 mix as we did before. Again, you wonder how I do that. I was sloppy that time. I'm going to give a bit more. There we are. Perfect amount. All right, mix them up good. Take our palette with the epoxy on it over to the board. And like I say, here we're going to be a bit more generous with how much epoxy we're putting in there. So a big spaghetti fork full of epoxy. I'll make sure it gets right down in there against the tape. And we want to take it to the point where the epoxy actually starts to run out the bottom here. And then we'll start mopping up the part that's running out the bottom. So let's get a little look at that. Yeah, it's starting to run out the bottom, so that's about what we wanted to go with there. Take our handy spatula here and This time I'm going this way. I'm going to roll it up around. All right. Well, that's actually not looking too bad. The challenge is as it sets, you kind of have to keep the board at exactly the right angle. So you might have to stand here for 5 minutes as it starts to get a little firmer sometime. But I think that's going to be pretty good. Maybe I'll just get one more little scoop of excess off. Right, but to make that perfect, we're going to have to let that set overnight because we've put so much in there that we can't do a fast coat on top of it. All right, we're back after letting the board set overnight, so the epoxy's all good and ready to work with it again. And so you can see here how we filled most of it in. And what often happens with a major impact like this is you'll get cracking along the sidewall of the board on either side of the major impact. So there is a little additional crack here, and when we do the finishing touches on there, we're going to also fill in that crack so we make sure the board's nicely sealed up. All right, here we go with those finishing touches. Get rid of the screwdriver out of here, get a little epoxy going here, and we're going to put a layer down the top side, like that. Just paint that in nicely. Give it a little squeeze this way. Then we roll it over to here and do the top side of that. And we'll just let that set, and tomorrow we can hit the water with it.